Well, good morning and welcome to Table of Grace. My name is Chad McSwain, and I have the pleasure of being the lead pastor here. And it's so good to see each and every one of you. I want to thank you for those of us that are joining us online and a part of our online campus. And we're glad that you are part of our worship today. But so as we begin today, I just invite you to open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. And if you're in need of a Bible, we have Bibles right out there in that back corner. And if you would like to, it's okay to right now to get up, to go grab a Bible. We want you to have a Bible, so grab one of those. And if you don't have a Bible, you can keep that Bible. And our hope that you would have a Bible that you can read that's not in Shakespeare, and a Bible that you would understand, unless, of course, you read a lot of Shakespeare and you like that kind of thing. So as we look at Matthew chapter 5, we're going to continue our sermon series called Be Salty, as we look at those Beatitudes that Jesus began his Sermon on the Mount with. These Beatitudes, these statements, these provocative announcements, these grace-filled proclamations that when we are in these places that seem to be the places we don't want to be in, these places where we seemed lost and alone, Jesus is announcing that God is with us in these places. And so as we look at these statements, we look at them as announcements of grace, but they're also an invitation to us, an invitation to live out our faith in the way that God would call us to. An invitation to us to believe the grace of God and to step out in new ways, even in these places where we wonder if God is near to us. And so we're looking at these really around the question of, and this is kind of the question that I've been thinking of, is if we look at these Beatitudes, we look at these statements, and we really consider them, we really make them a part of our lives, and we really take Jesus at his word, what would happen all around us if we truly were salty, if we truly were the light everywhere we go? So Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 1, it tells us this: that when Jesus saw the crowds, that he sat down on the mountainside, and they came to him, and they sat down. And Jesus began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for you will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for you will inherit the earth. Blessed are you who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for you will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for you will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for you will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for you will be called children of God. Blessed are you when you are persecuted for doing the right thing, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. You are the salt of the earth. If salt loses its flavor, what good is it for? How can it become salty again? Well, it's only good to be thrown out on the ground to be trampled on. You are the light of the world, a city on a hill. No one lights a lamp and then covers it with a basket, but you light a lamp for everyone to see. So let your light shine, so that all people may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." Well, I love sports, and really anything competitive. I mean, even if I've never heard about it before, even board games, I mean, whatever it is, if you can win, I'm totally into it. And I know whenever I was dating my wife, Brandy, that we would, we're always trying to find things to do. What would be a fun date? So we would go and we'd play tennis, we'd play mini golf. Sometimes we'd even go and shoot hoops. And anytime we would go and do something like that, I would try to win, right? Because winning is what it's all about. I mean, I didn't want my girlfriend to beat me. I mean, I wanted to win, and because I just love sports and competition. But since I'm from Oklahoma, I'm going to wait for the Blessed Are the Persecuted week to tell you who my favorite football team is. But I will tell you today that in addition to the Mavericks, that my favorite NBA team is the Oklahoma City Thunder. So you can imagine my shock 13 days ago when Kevin Durant announced that he was going to go and take his talents to the Golden State Warriors. And anytime, you follow sports like that and your favorite player leaves, it's not a good time, right? This is a time to grieve and a time to mourn, but it makes it even worse when he goes to the team that eliminated you from the Western Conference Finals this past season, thereby eliminating any hope for retribution for the total collapse that all Thunder fans were a part of this past season. And so just this past weekend, I was in Oklahoma, and I was talking with a young man, and we'd been talking long enough, and we had enough rapport, I felt like, that I ventured the question, how are people in Oklahoma doing now that Kevin Durant has left town? And he looked at me as if he was trying to find the right words, and then he just shook his head, and he said, "Still not good." And I just said, "Man, I'm with you." Because if you love sports and you follow sports, it is an exercise in frustration and mourning and grief. But as Jesus looked out on the crowds that day, he began his Sermon on the Mount with this Beatitudes. And the second Beatitude he offered to them, and Beatitude is just a word that means blessed, because each of these phrases begins with, "Blessed are you." And he looks out upon the crowd and he says, "Blessed are you who mourn, for you will be comforted." Now, when I think about this, I love the idea of being blessed. I love the idea of being in God's favor. Being in God's favor is something that I want and desire and that I would want for you. And I love the idea of being comforted, those places where we need people to come alongside of us, to be with us, to take care of us, to say those right words, or maybe to say nothing at all. I love the idea of being comforted. But to be blessed and to be comforted, I have to experience mourning. Well, I don't really like the idea of that. In fact, I'd much rather be happy. And as we look at this phrase, blessed, that we could also translate the word blessed in our Beatitudes, we could translate it as happy. So the phrase could actually be, "Happy are those who mourn," or "Happy are those who grieve, for they will be comforted." And I'd much rather talk about being happy. When we gather together here on a Sunday morning, I'd much rather talk about being happy. I would much rather, feel happy. I would much rather, have 5 steps to happiness and 3 things that I could do to continue to be happy. I would much rather be about those kind of things. And really, it seems kind of biblical, right? That when we think about the fruits of the Spirit, that one of the fruits of the Spirit is joy. And joy is that type of happiness that only God can provide, that type of happiness that's happiness beyond anything that possessions can provide, or relationships or pleasure can give to us, or circumstances will allow us. But it's a way in which we are joyfully full of only the happiness God can provide, no matter what circumstance we are in. It's kind of a biblical thing. And yet, if we skip right over mourning because it's difficult to talk about, or maybe it's a difficult experience for us, then we're completely overlooking an important part of what it is to be human. In fact, in John chapter 11, we see the story in which Jesus heard that his friend Lazarus was sick. And so Jesus waited 3 days, and then when he arrived at Lazarus' home, he hears that Lazarus has died. And in verse 35, we see how Jesus responded to this. Jesus has heard that Lazarus has died, and it tells us this, that Jesus began to cry. And the Jews said, "See how much he loved him?" Because when we look at this and we kind of think about mourning, I love that this story is here, and it becomes even more interesting and compelling when we continue to read, and we read that Jesus cried and that Jesus mourned, and then he went, and then he actually rose his friend from the dead after 3 days, that his friend came back to life, thereby proving that Jesus had power over life and death. But what makes this so compelling is that Jesus knew that this was an opportunity to display God's glory, and yet he still took time to mourn something that he lost. The story challenges me because I don't like to mourn. When I find myself in those circumstances where things are not the way that they should be, or I feel like they should be, or I've lost something important to me, I like to still act like that everything's okay. I like to say, oh, everything's fine, and keep everything secret, keep everything quiet, just keep the status quo. And yet Jesus is demonstrating to me and to all of us that it's okay to mourn. It's okay to enter into these times and to say, God, this is not the way it's supposed to be. But I like how the story continues. Look at this. So in verse 37, it says, while some were saying, see how much he loved him, it continues, but some of them said, he healed the eyes of the man born blind. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? I loved what a truthful question that is, that these people that are surrounding Jesus that day, that they had the thought, here's this man who can do anything. He's performed the most amazing of miracles. Why couldn't he just heal Lazarus so that Lazarus wouldn't have to die? Because have you ever had that moment where you thought, can't God just take away this experience of mourning? Can't the God who created galaxies and mountains and megalodons and really raise the dead back to life, couldn't this God keep us from this experience of mourning, of pain, and grief? Well, I think the reason is this, that you and I, we are called to radical, revolutionary love. We are called to love our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves. Jesus even says that we should love our enemies, that everyone would know that we follow Jesus because of our love. Our love is supposed to be extraordinary, holy, perfect. And when you and I have that kind of love, when you and I love in that way, we're going to have times where we experience loss, mourning, grief, and pain. Because we mourn when we lose those things that are important to us. We mourn when someone we love dies. We mourn when marriages end in divorce. We mourn when our relationships come to an end. We mourn when we lose a job that we loved and valued, and maybe even a career path comes to an end. We mourn when we don't get the job we were hoping for. We mourn when maybe even sometimes we receive a blessing of a new opportunity, and yet it would mean that we leave some things behind. Maybe we move to a new place and we leave friends behind. We mourn transitions. Because when we mourn, it reveals to us those things that we love. And when we feel this place of mourning, when it wells up inside of us, it reveals to us that our world is not the way it's supposed to be. When we mourn and we grieve, it reveals to us that there are places, there are situations, there are things in our world that are still in need of redemption, still in need of healing, still in need of salvation. Mourning reveals that to us. So as Jesus looks out upon the crowd, people who are religious, people who feared God, people who knew the Torah, who kept the law, who came to Jesus that day to see what it is that Jesus might reveal about God. To those who came to Jesus that day and they were far from God, they were irreligious, they were people that knew nothing of the ways of God, and yet they were looking for hope. They were looking for something different. To those who came to Jesus that day and they were looking for a king who might be the king that would finally bring back the glory days, who would finally restore the kingdom, who would finally do the right things that everyone would hope for, that would free them from those who are oppressing them. Jesus tells them this: in the midst of your mourning, in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your grieving, in the midst of unmet expectations, God is not absent. God is not ignoring you. God is not far from you. God is right there with you. And God is comforting you. In John 15:26, as Jesus prepares to leave this life and to prepare his disciples for the ministry that would come next, Jesus says to them, "When I go, I will ask the Father, and he will send to you a comforter, one who will come alongside of you and reveal all truth to you." And that word comforter is the same word that we have here in this beatitude. Jesus is saying that when we're in places of mourning, when we're in these times of grief and of loss, when we come to the feet of God, there we will find God and receive the Holy Spirit. But there's an interesting progression in the Beatitudes. Because as Jesus is talking to this crowd, he wants them to know that as they mourn those things that are going on in their outside world, that they may also be mourning their inside world, the condition of their heart, the condition of their soul. Because as Jesus began the Beatitudes, we begin with "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Blessed are you when you come to this realization, when you see for the very first time that you are in need of grace, that you lack that thing that will make you truly alive. You become aware of it. You know of your need for God. And then as Jesus continues, "Blessed are you when you mourn," when you see those places in which you are far from God, those places where you've made mistakes, those things in your past you wish weren't there, those parts of your story you don't want to share with other people, those places where you've missed the mark, where you've sinned, where you've gone astray, and you're just torn up about it. And you mourn it, and you wish it wasn't there. Jesus says, "Blessed are you when you're in this place, because God will comfort you." It seems like every week now we've had another occasion to mourn together as a people, whether it's terrorism and tragedy in France, or we mourn together as a people here in Dallas, or we mourn tragedy in Florida and the oppression of groups all around us, and our need for redemption, our need for love, our need to come together as a people, where we show just how broken our world truly is, and oftentimes we overlook, we don't quite pay attention to, maybe we miss, and yet it seems like it's on the forefront now, that this is an occasion to grieve, to cry out to God and to say, "God, how long?" Because Jesus says to us, when we do that, we will see that we're not alone. We're not alone. So whenever I was in Oklahoma this past weekend, my wife Brandy was there as well, as was our 6-year-old daughter Eliana. And we went to Oklahoma to go and be part of a medical conference organized around the birth defect known as bladder exstrophy. And bladder exstrophy affects children. It's extremely rare, maybe 1 in 30,000 births. It's a birth defect that affects people for their entire lives. It requires lots of surgery. And each defect's a little different, but basically it presents itself as the bladder being on the outside, and then it affects so many other systems of the body that doctors have to continually find ways to care and to treat and to bring about a quality of life for their patients. And we went to that conference to hear from doctors and from social workers and for others who have that same condition, because it was a condition that our daughter Eliana was born with. And so as we went to this conference, we went to hear from the doctors and to hear from others, but we also went to meet other people who had children with the same condition. And over the last couple of years, we've been able to organize a support group here in Dallas, and we've been able to connect with so many other families. But it's so amazing that as we went, and on Friday night we had a pizza night, and so we went to the pizza night, and as we're kind of standing around and people are walking in, there came this moment where we're kind of standing there awkwardly, you're not really sure what to say. And then we'd say, "Does your child have bladder exstrophy?" And they would say, "Yes." And then we would just begin to share our stories, sharing those stories, that personal information that so often you don't share, but we just knew that we have friends, that we have a family, we have a tribe, that these people know what we're talking about. These people have been there with us, and we would share, how long our surgeries would be, and for us, we'd say, "Oh yeah, our big surgery was 11 hours. How big was yours?" "Oh, it was 18 hours. Wow, that's incredible." I mean, we would just share stories like this. It's completely bizarre unless this is a part of your everyday life. And it was so amazing for our daughter, who was 6 years old, to meet other kids that had that same condition. And even at one moment, she was being really shy, and some kids came up to her and they said, "Will you play tag with us?" And she says, "No, I don't want to." And they said, "But you have to have bladder exstrophy to play tag with us." And she says, "Okay, I'll play." But we had the opportunity to visit with so many families, and I loved hearing their stories. And we met people from Florida, and we met people from Texas and Oklahoma, all over the country, even met a family from Canada who traveled to this conference. And at one point, we were in a small group of us, and we were sharing our stories, and a mom who was sitting there with her niece and with her mom. And she shared that she was from Colorado, and she says, prior to coming to this conference this day, we had never met anyone else with the same condition as our daughter. When we open ourselves up to mourning, to grieving, we will find that we're not alone. You're not alone today. So today, if you are experiencing loss, whatever it might be, if you're in this place where you've lost something you love, something that you value, something that's important to you, something that you wish was still there, know that you are not alone, that we are right there with you. God is right there with you, and God will comfort you. But I will invite you today, if you are not in this season of mourning, you're not in this season of grieving, I would invite you to be salty in this way. I would invite you to pray this week. Pray that God would open up your eyes, that God would open up your ears, that you would be aware of those who are around you, those who may be in this season of grieving, this season of mourning. And ask God, how can I serve them? How can I give them an encouraging word? How can I say to them, I am with you. You're not alone. God is with you. Perhaps say to them this week, blessed are you when you mourn, for you are comforted.